This is Anderson Penn's podcast episode 156 for Tuesday, June 16th, 2015. This is Brian.
This is Lisa.
This is the Anderson Penn's Radio Network.
Cool. All nibs, all night.
So we have a third. I see there's a third thing here on the screen here. There's a third. Who is this?
It's so cool.
Who do we have with us here? The Nib. I hate to use the term Nibmeister. But,
no, it's not a proper term. I'm a Nib.
I kind of hate the term actually.
It was explained to me by somebody who I trust very much that if other people call you that, well, that's up to them, but never call yourself that. So
right.
I'm
Absolutely.
a nib worker.
Nib worker extraordinaire, okay. Mr. Tim Girdler.
This is so cool.
So, thank you for joining us, Tim.
Thank you for having me. This is really cool.
What's it like to be on this side of the chat?
I don't know. I just want to say that I've got food, ballpoints, rollerball right now.
Oh, 1 minute in.
Nice. Wow, you're just stacking the deck.
All right.
All right. So all nibs all night.
All of the bets will have to be for the second mention.
There you go.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? We've got a rough schedule here, set of questions, but let's start out with who you are, your background, what you do, why people recognize you, because I'm sure people do.
Yeah, I am by trade a musician and a pastor. I grew up in music. Both my parents are musicians. I taught music, went to school for music, went to the Manhattan School of Music for 2 years, ultimately graduated with a music ed degree from the University of Maryland. Taught school for 2 years before I went to seminary, and have been a pastor since 2009. And so I got into Penn's part-time for a couple of reasons. Mostly it's because Richard Binder retired and I couldn't send him any pens to fix anymore.
So out of necessity.
Pretty much, yeah. Like I got into fountain. I bought my first Parker 51, I think, 3 days before he announced he was not going to take pens for restoration anymore. And so that was kind of like the thud heard around the fountain pen world. And I was like, well, great, what am I going to do now? And then the response became, well, learn to do it yourself.
And this was what, about, now we're going on probably 2 years ago now. Am I right?
I think it was actually closer to 4. No.
Has it been that long?
It was early 2000. It was early 2012. Yeah.
Okay. Barbara's been trying to get him to do it for longer.
Yeah. So I'm a tinkerer by nature, and so that's kind of how I started playing with pens. But the business side of it has been only part-time, which is all that I can do because of being in full-time Christian ministry, which there are challenges with that. I can't really do pens as fast as other people do. Now, truth be told, Richard will tell you that I'm slow, but I prefer the word deliberate, but I'm slow.
It's better to be slow than to be fast and break pens.
Well, that's true. And even right now, the income from the pen business supplements the income from the church because our church is in bad financial situations, and being a Baptist church means we're independent. Regardless of what association or convention we happen to cooperate with, all Baptist churches are, strictly speaking, independent. So there's no central office that can help us out to meet payroll or anything like that. In fact, one of the challenges that we're having, and this has shown up on my website, is that my wife is not going back to the job that she has had for the last 6 years teaching English, and so we're really in a scramble to find different suitable jobs to provide well for our family. We've applied to schools to teach, me to teach Bible and or music, Bonnie to teach English. We've applied to schools all over the place. We've gotten a lot of rejections. We've gotten several positive responses, but haven't landed anything yet. So most of my waking moments are consumed with trying to provide well for my family. So
yeah, as they should.
As it should.
Family comes first,
Absolutely.
right? So
yeah.
Now, when you do get to sneak away into your repair bench, and I know this is totally off the script, and that's the totally least move. Is that like a private Zen kind of place for you, or like do you jam out when you're working on pens? I'm just curious, and then we'll get back on script.
Usually I listen to music. Quite often it depends what mood I'm in. But the mood lately has been listening through the Mahler symphonies while I'm working on pens.
nice.
So and I know that if I listen to Mahler 2 and Mahler 3, I've been at the workbench too long, because each symphony is about an hour and a half each.
Do you have which brings up an interesting question. Do you have and I go through this on weekends too. Sunday's usually my day for repair. Sometimes Saturday, sometimes Monday. But do you have a procedure? Do you sit down for a couple hours? Do you get up? And what's the process when you sit down for repairs? Because I know if you're in the groove and you're going, you got to stay there. But in other words, if you sit for too long, sometimes you get a little fuzzy.
Yeah.
Things start
Definitely.
to go bad.
Yeah. I will say that there are days where I've had it been that the first pen out of the bin has been bad, and the second one has gone worse, and I turn the lights off, and I don't come back to the shop for a day or two.
Yep.
I don't have a dartboard in my shop, but that pen might wind up in it if I did. And considering I deal with a lot of other people's pens, I want to treat them better than my own pens, so I don't want to do that to their pens.
Right.
But generally speaking, I try to do a couple at a time. Most of the work time I get now are the overnight hours. And so my wife and my girls are sleeping, and I'm down here, and I don't want to be down here too long, because I can do that, and I can watch the sunrise. But sometimes I'll go the next day, I'll be like, oh yeah, that pen's leaking because I forgot to put thread sealant on the section. So sometimes fresher is better, and there's a world of advantage in distance sometimes, even if it's just for 5-10 minutes or an hour.
Well, I just think it's hard sometimes for people to understand that you are sent a pen, and whether it's to be repaired or to have the nib tweaked,
right?
It's not the kind of thing you can just power through for 8 hours.
No.
Like you can being a cashier or
right.
data entry or something. You reach a point where mentally and physically you have to take a break, and I think that some people customers don't necessarily understand that. I sent you the pen 3 weeks ago. Why isn't it done? Because I had a bad morning and you had to wait.
Well, that's true, and it's really interesting. I don't think of fixing pens necessarily as a physical activity, although they say that if you have a job where you usually use your mental facilities, which I would say that pastoring or teaching is more in that vein, that it's best to have a hobby at which you use your fingers. Or if you're a carpenter where you're using your fingers and hands all the time, then you should have a hobby that's mental.
To keep a balance.
Right, to keep a balance. And so this is my finger time. But I will say, even though it's not really a physical activity, I can come down here in the middle of winter when it's really cold on this the pen shop's on the first floor of a 3-story townhome. And it's at ground level. I can come down here and I can work on 4 or 5 pens, and literally my shirt will be soaked when I'm done. Not because it's hard work, but just because you get into it.
Yeah.
And,
I find that when I'm working on pens, sometimes it's like, after a couple hours, 2-3 hours, I got to get up, and if it's been rough, like a couple weeks ago, I had 2 Skylines in here that were almost identical, striped caps. Neither one of the dang things came apart. And no matter how much I'd use heat or soaking, things wouldn't come apart. I said, screw it. I put them down. That was it for the day. And then finally they came apart after weeks. And but sometimes it's just like you get to a certain point, and okay, I've had enough successes for the day, and I'm not going to ruin it, and I'm done. And maybe it's 2 hours, maybe it's 4, maybe it's 6.
Are you familiar with the Waterman Jif-Matic thumb filler?
Jif-Matic thumb filler, 60s?
I don't remember the vintage, but I had one that several other repair people had passed on because it has an aluminum tube that goes around a sack that's shellacked to a nipple, and it goes into the section. And it has this little door, and the door actuates the lever inside the sack guard. That sack guard is really tough to get off, and one of them that's owned by a good friend of mine, it took me about 6 months to get it apart because I would try a little bit every day because because it's aluminum, when you put any sort of forcep or any sort of anything on it, it distorts, it bends. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I was able to put it back into pretty good shape, and it works fine, but those are one of those things that if you get it too hot, it's probably polystyrene, so you don't want to melt it, you don't want to crack it, but it took a long time, but it's fixed and it works. So,
now, Tim, tell us how you got interested in pens. I mean, everybody's story is different. What made you get into fountain pens?
My handwriting is horrible.
Oh, good. We're not the only one. Thank God.
In fact, I had got into pens. One of my professors in seminary is really, really into fountain pens, and he got into it because his handwriting was terrible. And I've had terrible handwriting for probably since I was a fetus. I mean, it's just been that bad.
So you're blaming your mother?
No, her handwriting's really nice, and so is my dad's. I really don't know why I'm terrible. So when I was in class with him in seminary, he was talking about fountain pens, and so I bought my first Esterbrook from him. Really loved it. It's just a plain black one. I think it's it's nothing special. It's special to me, obviously. But his hobby is he walks through antique shops and finds pens and restores them for fun. So I bought it from him and really enjoyed it, and then I started to get back into fountain pens because I noticed it made my handwriting better, and I bought some really bad pens.
Didn't we all, right?
Yeah. Like they were modern pens, and they didn't work right. And I had never heard of nib tuning. I had never heard of anything. And so I really, at that point, just got frustrated and put them away and went back to rollerball land and bought several really nice Waterman Expert rollerballs, which I think is a great pen. It's just not a fountain pen.
All right, so those of you keeping track, 816 rollerball.
There you go. And then it happened that I was at church riding with these Waterman rollerballs and a Waterman Expert ballpoint. There's your second ballpoint. That one of my best friends had given me for playing trumpet at his wedding. I played him and his wife up and down the aisle. So, which is one of my favorite things to offer my really good friends, to play at their wedding for free. But he gave me a Waterman ballpoint with my name on it and everything, and so it was still is a very special pen. It's in my pen chest. So I was writing with this in the prayer journal at church, and I simply couldn't read it when it came time to print the prayer list. And so I went back to fountain pens, thinking that it would make my handwriting better, which it did. But then again, not really having learned my lesson, I bought some cheaper pens, and they just wrote horrible. They wouldn't start. They would, burp and do all that sort of weird stuff. And so I was on Fountain Pen Network, and I saw people talking about TWSBI. And so I bought a TWSBI. The diamond, I think it was a 540 at the time, the clear one.
Mm-hmm. 540, 530. That push
Yeah,
too. Yeah.
and it worked beautifully. I filled it with Noodler's Black Swan and Australian Roses, and wrote with it, and just loved every minute of it. But see, I thought that it was a piston filler that made it a more reliable pen. And so that was late 2011, and so I emailed Richard Binder, actually, not having ever met him before, thinking, of course, piston filler. That's what makes a pen good. And I asked him, what a good big boy pen would be, and he recommended the Bexley Corona. And so I made an appointment with him to go to the Philly Pen Show in 2012, which is the only Saturday all winter that it snowed that year. And so we made it to Philly like an hour before the show closed, and I bought my pen, and it was a whole new world of awesome. I mean, I didn't know a pen could write like that. And so I really, it hadn't dawned on me yet that it really wasn't the piston filler. But as things progressed, I just enjoyed it more and more because it was a more enjoyable writing experience. My hand wouldn't cramp up. My other things wouldn't happen. I could write in proper cursive. And so yeah, that's kind of how I got back into it, and I've been in the fountain pens ever since.
And then what made you get into repairing, and then from there, did you get into nibs or vice versa?
I actually started with nibs first. Part of the thing about emailing Richard is that we have a lot of similar interests. He is a music aficionado, and I'm a music nut. I mean, who else listens to Mahler symphonies for fun? Because Mahler is like deep music. So we were, emailing back and forth about that. We sort of struck up a relationship even before Philly, and just sort of on a whim. I didn't even ask my wife about this. At the table while he was tuning my pen in Philly, I said, "Hey, after Baltimore, you want to go out and eat?" And he said, "Yeah, I don't think we have anything going on Sunday. How about Sunday?" And so that was that, and that's kind of how we got to be friendly. And then so we would email back and forth, and he would give me pointers. I don't think he had yet published his nib smoothing notes that he does at certain pen shows, but he would give me pointers, and then so I started collecting the Levenger True Writer.
Oh.
For one simple reason.
Wait a minute. You're scoffing at that, Lisa? Didn't you have a bunch of them?
I did. That was my problem. I loved them. They were designed after the Esterbrook, so what's not to love? They were pretty. I think they've gone a little over the top recently, but no, I probably have had half a dozen or more. I fell in love with the Sea Glass model a couple years ago and bought one, and I have never been able to get one to write.
It's the pen you love to hate.
It is.
Well, yeah.
It is. I have never been able to consistently write with a True Writer. In fact, they offered us a pen to review, and they said, well, we can send you a True Writer or the LTEC. And I emailed and said, I've never had a good experience with the True Writer. Don't send that one.
Oh, wow, okay.
Because I can't write a good review.
I've had issues with several of them, but the thing is that the nibs on those pens are not the highest quality nibs that somebody could source for that pen. So, it's just one of the challenges with that pen. But the reason I originally bought it is because I knew the nib units were replaceable, and I had already fried a 51 nib trying to tune it.
So if you screwed up, you just buy another one, you put it in.
That's right. And so I figured it was cheaper to buy a $25. I think they sell them for $25, or they did back then. So, and I was getting all of mine from the Levenger eBay outlet store.
Yes.
So the pens were in various forms of refurbishment. And so, I would get them and play with them, and I enjoyed it very much. But I still wasn't happy with what I could do with a pen, with a nib. And by that point, I had caught the 51 bug and didn't really know anything about what I was doing. In fact, somebody that lived close to us was Tom Mullane, who sadly passed away about a year and a half ago. Yeah, old Grizz. And so I took the 51 that I burned the nib off of over to him to have him replace it. And he knew what he was doing, and I didn't. And so he gave me some pointers, encouraged me to keep pursuing it. And we had it was really sad. The day he died was a Friday, and I had just talked to him the Wednesday before. We used to talk for about an hour a week for, a long time. So, but he really encouraged me early on. And so that was progressing. I still wasn't happy with what I was doing, and then I bought this pen from there's a store in Arizona that Todd Nussbaum runs out of his house called isellpens.com, and I bought a cheap Chinese duofold copy, and I think it's pronounced Kaigalu or Kaijalu.
Oh,
I don't
sure,
know.
yeah.
And so here's stupid little me. I'm like, oh, well, I'll just get these pens, and I know that the nibs are bad, and I'll just put Yovo nibs in them. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'll just resell them and charge more. And well, I pulled the nib out of the pen and realized that it was like a 5.5.
So a size 6 isn't going to fit.
And neither is a 5.
Oh.
It's like, oh, great. So I have this pen, and it writes like a bucket of paint. I mean, it's just terrible. And so I sat down one day and I figured, okay, I've got some 2000 grit sandpaper, the wet dry auto sandpaper that Richard uses and he told me about. And I'm like, I'm either going to kill this pen or I'm going to make it right the way I want it to. And I sat down with it, started to work on it, and basically turned it into a fine point, all by hand. It was before I had any sort of Dremel or anything. And was happy with the way that it wrote. Now, Richard had invited me to watch what he did at the DC Pen Show in 2012, so I brought that pen with me, and I showed it to him, and he wrote with it, and is really only that he can do. He sort of stepped back and was like, if you can do this without any formal training, then you should probably come see me and spend some time with me. And that was kind of how it started. On that first visit, which was that fall, we did nib tuning, we did lever fillers, vacuumatic fillers, 51s, and all that sort of stuff. And that was the first of several trips. And so I kind of got into pen restoration through the back door because I always wanted to mess with nibs more than I wanted to restore pens. I, in fact, am very embarrassed about a statement that I made once that I said, well, any monkey can restore a pen, but it takes a craftsman to do a nib. Well, it just goes to show how young and stupid I was at the time. Of course, I was a lot more stupid than I was young, but it really takes a craftsman to even restore a pen because there's a whole different set of issues. And I think being able to do both is optimum, but there are some people who don't touch nibs that I'll just readily admit do far better restoration work than I do. So
yeah, they're really two separate skill sets.
Yeah, they are.
I mean, because there's so much to learn about each one.
Oh, sure.
It's difficult to say, okay, well, today we're going to learn vacuumatics and snorkels, and tomorrow we're going to do nibs. It doesn't work that way.
No.
You have to do repetitive, and then get into it, so it's a long process.
That's true. So
should we get into myths? Do we want to get into myths?
Yeah, let's get into as our resident expert. Let's talk about some nib myths.
Because we did a little show about a month or two ago.
A couple weeks ago, yeah.
like a couple weeks ago.
Myths and legends.
Myths and legends, and I think it went over really well. So some of these actually may be duplicated, but we have a little bit
or
different.
Similar.
Yeah, they're similar, but we have a little different slant on
Right.
here now that we're talking about nibs. How do you want to do this? You want me to read it off? And
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. Myth number 1. A nib worker can make my nib right perfectly.
Yeah, that's a definite myth.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, I wish it wasn't the case, but the truth of the matter is that no two nibs are going to be exactly the same. And what we try to do is we try to optimize the performance of each nib, because no two nibs are the same. We want to each nib presents its own problem, its own challenge, and its own solution. Some of those challenges and solutions are very reminiscent of other challenges and solutions, and some are just completely out of left field. So what we do is we optimize the nib for the best that it can be. Some nibs can be better than others, and I think this even goes so far as to the different nib workers. I remember the DC Pen show in my first one, I think it was 2013, and somebody had brought me a nib from another well-known nib worker. I'm very comfortable calling him a nibmeister. And they asked me to do something different to it, and I almost was like, no, I shouldn't do that, because I think that would be like drawing a mustache on the Mona Lisa. It's just not something. It's just not something you do to that gentleman's work. And they insisted, and so I said okay. And I went and asked Richard about it. He's like, oh yeah, that's fine. I'm like, how is that fine? He said, well, look, I get pens from other people, other nibmeisters, and I work on them. He said, I'm sure that other people get my pens. He said, you'll probably get pens that I've done for people that they want tweaked. I'll get pens from you that other people, that you've done for other people that they want tweaked. He's like, the point is that every nib worker is different. And some people's preferences will match up better with any given nib worker. And so there's just so many variables that a nib cannot necessarily be made to write perfectly, but it can be made to write very well and to be optimized to write well for you. And a whole host of other people too. But there's a difference between seeking perfection, which I don't think is attainable in nib work, and seeking excellence and that sort of thing.
Right, because everybody holds the pen differently.
Right.
Different pressure, different angle, the whole.
Right. Now and different paper too. That brings in a whole different set of variables. But my goal when I tune a pen is to make it as neutral as I can, to make it write good at every angle, from say a 30-degree angle to a 90-degree angle. And one of the best things I have going for me really is that my wife writes completely different than I do. So she tests every pen after I've tuned it just to make sure it writes well for her. And if it writes well for the both of us, then we figure that's good.
Yeah, at least Lisa's laughing because whenever I work on a pen and I get it done. And my test is if I always walk into the bedroom.
And I always roll my eyes and go, oh God,
doing
not
something.
again.
I hand her the pen, and I've got this excited look on my face. I'm like, this thing writes really well. You got to check this out. And she's like, okay. And then she has this. I give her a piece of paper, and then she usually writes how she feels about it. Lisa thinks this pen stinks, or whatever.
Because I actually twist. I've discovered that I twist a little bit as I write, and so what is perfect for Brian is not perfect for me.
Right.
And I think that then he goes and takes it back and tweaks it a little more and brings it back, and once we've we've both written with it and it's good for both of us, then it's neutral enough, to use your term.
Right. And I'm a little, when I tune my own pens, I actually tune my pens differently if it's a pen I plan to keep. I'm not as aggressive with it as I am for other people. So that's something that I don't understand. In fact, some of my friends don't understand it. But I try to get it to the point where I know I'm going to hold it, and I pretty much tune it for me. So
in that case, it does write perfectly.
For me, yes.
Now, you mentioned nibs and nib workers resonating with different people. Do you find that you prefer to work on someone's nib when they're in front of you at a show, or do you
Very
prefer to
much.
work on it at home when you're alone in your zone, you and Waller?
I very much prefer to work a nib for somebody. One of the things that I will do, especially if they get like an italic nib, of all of the pen shows I've done, which of course doesn't hold a candle to the pen shows that you guys have done.
Nor do you want to.
I have only ever cut one crisp italic for one person. And it was on a Pilot Vanishing Point nib. But one of the things that I like to do is I like to make all of the initial cuts and then hand them the pen and say, here, you're going to hate this. And they write with it. They're like, yeah, you're right. I do hate it. And then I start the finishing process. And I let them test it at each step of the way. And by the time we get to whatever they've asked for, whether it be the cursive or the pillow or even, well, the cuts on a stub are different. But by the time we get to the end of it, they're like, wow. And it's just a question of rounding off the square edges in the proper way. So, but yeah, I greatly prefer that, not just because of the interaction, but because I can get it exactly what they want it to be.
That's cool.
All right, myth number 2. Ready for this?
Sure.
I am.
Most pens are perfect out of the box.
Yeah, it's not true. Some companies are better than others. But in general, I think it's safe to say that most new pens will benefit to a larger or a smaller degree from some kind of nib tuning. And I think that's just an issue of the way that the companies do the manufacturing today. Most companies will test maybe 1 out of every 10 pens. And I don't think they'll tune it. I just think they'll test it. Mm-hmm. And so some of them are really, in every sense of the word, virgin by the time they get into the person's hand who buys them. And it's not really. Sometimes it can be a great writing experience. Sometimes it isn't. And I think some people may not understand the value of a nib tuning because they've never had a well-tuned pen. I think it's a distinct possibility. I'm not willing to bet the farm on that, but I think it's a distinct possibility.
Do you? I'm going to interject here for a second. This is something I wanted to discuss. Do you think? It's been my experience in, say, the last, and I'm sure Lisa's going to back me up on this, the last 5 years, there's been an increase in not only the number of people who one would consider to be a nib worker. You see them at shows all the time now. It used to be there was 1, now there's 3, 4, 5. 6. Do you think? Yeah. Do you think that there are people just? I don't want to use the word picky, but people just assume that the nib is bad, so they have to go send it off right away. It just, to me, it seems a little absurd when we started, Lisa and I started almost 20 years ago. That didn't happen. I mean, you sent the nib off the model shop, you needed a retip, but that was it. It just seems that some people aren't even giving the nibs a chance. They're just assuming they're bad or they're not great or whatever, and they're sending them out.
I think you actually raise a really good point. There are reasons to buy pens from people who tune them before they send them out, but that doesn't mean that buying pens from other people won't get you a great pen. Mm-hmm. I think it's perfectly acceptable and probably a better course of action to buy the pen you want, to write with it, and then if it needs an adjustment, then you seek it out. You know, a lot of times also, you know, I'm sure you guys know this, and probably everybody in the chat knows it too. Anderson Pens has a following, and regardless of who does what to what pen before they send it out, most of your clients are probably going to come to you to get a pen, no matter who else is doing whatever to any other pen that you sell. And there are groups like that. I would buy any pen from you guys tomorrow. Whether
I
I
got a
could
couple
tune,
in mind.
okay. You know, whether I could tune nibs or not, I would buy any pen from you guys tomorrow, without batting an eyelash, because I know that while most pens are not going to be perfect out of the box, they're going to be far from horrible. They're going to provide still a very good writing experience. Of course, there are a couple that are just bad. But there are a couple that you can unbox and you can fill and you can write. And I've even told some people this. They've brought me pens at shows. And Brian, this goes exactly to what you were saying. It said, you know, I just bought this pen and I would like you to tune it. And so I fill it and I write with it, and I'll look at them and I say, you know what? I think you should save your money, because I'm not going to make this pen write $25 better. It writes great. I wouldn't touch it.
So, do you think that it's a cultural expectation now that you have to have that all nibs are bad and you have to have it tuned? I mean, do you think that this new upcoming generation of fountain pen users have just seen so much about nib workers and
right.
Oh, I had my nib work done by so and so, and now it just sings across the page, or oh, my whatever pen was bad and I sent it off and now it's perfect. Is there this expectation? Like, are people expecting it to be bad?
I think so, which is unfortunate. But really, when you have a sense, where you have groups like FPN and you know, other groups and those kind of things, where you're talking, you know, somebody says, well, I got this Modishawed this and it's great, and I got this Binderized that, and I got this Pendletuned, that's Pendleton Brown, Pendletuned this and it's great, and I got a Linderized, which is a Linda Kennedy thing, or I got this Modishawed, or I said him, the Mike Masayama, I got Mike Masayama to do this and it's great. I think it's the idea that people in some sense are thinking, well, I want to have the writing experience that they're having, and it's worth the extra $25 or so.
So is it almost like a Coach purse versus a TJ Maxx purse? Like, oh, I've got a Modishaw, and you just have a whatever?
You just have the base model.
It may be. Now, I don't want to devalue the value of a nib tuning.
No.
But... And again, there's advantage and pros and cons everywhere in the pen world. There's advantage to buying pens that you know that are going to be tuned before they're sent to you, but there's, you know, you pay for it. It's extra, even if it's not necessarily in the price. You know, from the people I know who sell pens and tune them before they send them out, if you want an entry-level pen, say, you know, like a Monteverdi Prima, which I think is a decent entry-level pen, and I know you guys have a lot of them because I see them at shows. You're not going to be able to get them from somebody who tunes nibs before they send them out, because most people who do that just aren't going to carry a pen that is that cheap, that inexpensive.
Yeah, there's not much margin in that. You have to charge significantly more, and you essentially double the price of the pen.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, I like the Prima. I think the Prima is a great pen.
Yeah, I would love to sell if I could pick up that line in my own shop. I would love to sell them. I think they're really, you know, for folks who want to get into it and want a really good writing experience from the beginning, that's not a bad pen to have.
It's a good value.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's certainly a decent entry level, good value, decent writer. It's not a sailor, it's not a pilot, but it's also not pretending to be.
That's right. Another thing that I will say is both of my TWSBI pens have been good out of the box. I have a TWSBI that 540, and I have a TWSBI Mini that my dad got me for Christmas one year. I have not tuned either of those nibs. And that's not...
They're both Yovo nibs.
Yes,
right?
they're both Yovo nibs.
Yep.
Okay.
I have not tuned either of those nibs, which is not to say that they wouldn't benefit from it, because I think they would. But also, I do want to keep on hand something that reminds me of what a good nib feels like, as opposed to a fantastic nib. And I would guarantee that I could give somebody that TWSBI Mini, and if I didn't tell them I never tuned it, they would probably think that it was a really great pen to write with. So it just goes to show you that it's, I don't want to say it's a crapshoot, because it's not, but the idea is that you probably should play with your pen and get to know your pen before you have somebody tinker with your pen in many situations. Obviously, there are some people who just don't want to mess with it. They want perfection from the beginning, and they're willing to pay for it, and that's fine. That's what makes the world go around. It's different.
Well, helps keep you in business.
Yeah.
Let me ask this question. How often do you see? So you mentioned somebody came to your table and they had a pen and it was brand new and it essentially rolled perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
How often do you see somebody bring a pen to you and the problem isn't so much with the nib as it is with the way the person holds the pen, the pressure, the angle?
That's a good question, because those things contribute perhaps greatly to the issues with the pen. There are some people who will get their first fountain pen, and then their first exercise writing will spring the nib so that the pen doesn't work, because they don't understand it's not a ballpoint. So
you mean all this is another myth, right? All nibs aren't flexible?
No. No.
Oh my God.
No. And so, yeah, as soon as you separate the nib from the feed and it doesn't go back, it's regardless of what the nib's made out of, it needs to come see somebody who can put it back in working order. But there can be those things. Also, I've had clients at my table who have been unhappy with a particular tuning, because when they get to the end of the line that they're writing, it says they say it gets scratchy at the end of the line. And I'm like, the reason is because you're rotating, which I do.
Yeah, me too.
The Parker 51 is my favorite pen, but I have to be very careful because it has no visible nib, and I can easily rotate it out of the sweet spot.
Yeah,
and
the
so,
sweet spot on the 51 is pretty, unless you've got a medium or broad.
Oh,
it's uncommon. It's really tough.
Yeah, it's tough. And so, it's I've had other clients who we may touch on this again later, but who have bought like an 18-karat Mont Blanc nib, and they'll ask me to tune it, and they'll write with it as if it's a flex nib. And one gentleman that I had who was very sincere and not mean at all said it just doesn't, the tuning just doesn't feel good when I write like this. And my response was, well,
Don't write like that.
There are things that I can fix, but how you're writing with that pen that was never intended to be written with that way is not something I can fix.
Yeah,
I can fix the pen, but I can't fix the user.
Right. We used to hand until we got testers for all our sailor pens. We would, and we still do to some degree. We would hand people our personal sailors, and it's no we don't keep it a secret that we really do love sailor pens. But I remember handing my sailor pen to somebody across the counter, and he's writing with these. Oh, it's flexible.
Oh.
Not anymore.
I'm like, give me that pen back.
Yeah, I just a story. My first time out tuning nibs for money at a pen store. I had a doctor come in who had beautiful 51s. They were both British. They both had double broad nibs. He loved the way one wrote, but he had worn a 45-degree foot on it. And the other one, he didn't like the way it wrote because he had not yet worn the foot in it. And so I let him write with my forest green gold-capped 51 that has a fine point on it. And just as an indication of the level of pressure this gentleman used, I used to use those carbon copy receipt books.
Mm-hmm.
So I put the cardboard under one of them, and he went through 6 carbons.
Oh, that's hard.
And so when I got my 51 back and looked at it, the nib was like this.
Oh, my.
And so I had to work on it and straighten it, and it is back in perfect working order now, but, you know, yeah, I feel your pain.
Luckily, it was all right. No nibs were harmed, but there have been times at shows when we've handed a pen over, watched somebody start to write, and we've cringed and literally like reached over to take it back. Wait, stop!
It's kind of like
Don't break my pen.
The inhaling scream in slow motion while your hand goes out.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Okay, so this let's lead into the next myth here, and maybe this is a myth, maybe it's not. So you're at a pen show, you're tuning nibs, you're smoothing them, you are using brown paper bags. True or false?
I am not using brown paper bags.
But that's the trick. That's the perfect thing to make it.
This has got to be one of the top. I don't know what the other 5 are, but it's one of the top, most ridiculous myths in the world of pens.
It is. The first reason that it's not good is that it's not a precision instrument. It's not.
I used the Cops paper bag. You know, that's the Cops grocery store.
Right. They're not built for. Their grit is not known, and even if it was, it's not consistent.
Right. So Trader Joe's is going to have a different grit on their brown paper bag than Publix, or
they very well might. Yeah.
We could sell a kit. It'll have the Publix, the Cops, and the Trader Joe's all in one little 3-pack.
Whole Foods. We'll go to Dallas and get some Whole Food bags.
There you go. So, but that's one of the most pervasive things out there, it hurts because there's damage. Frankly, it's not easy to fix, or it's not hard to fix if the person doesn't go crazy. But you can put grooves, because the paper bags have clay in them, and you can put grooves on the underside of the nib that you can't see. And it's they're too big, they're too small, they're inconsistent, they're not right, and it just doesn't help.
Well, and then the fact of the matter is micromesh and mylar are not that expensive. So if you buy the right tools, micromesh is 12,000 grits, $2.75, right? So I realize the paper bag is free when you buy your groceries, but
right.
Well, the damage is not.
Right, and if you're tuning, I mean, what is in your store? If I was to come in and buy a Mont Blanc 149, what would I pay? Ballpark.
List price on a 149 is $935.
Okay, so if you're playing with a $935 pen, you probably want to use something that is intended as a real tool for that pen.
The layman.
You'd think.
Yeah.
You'd hope.
I mean, you wouldn't take that out and try to reshape the nib on the sidewalk.
Oh, that's an awesome idea.
So,
okay.
Okay.
I'm going to hang on to it.
The brown paper bag is a no.
Yeah. So the brown paper bag, and it's one of those things that actually Tom Mullane used to be a proponent of, but he recanted and repented later in life. But it still goes around. It's an urban legend basically that makes the rounds every once in a while, and sometimes you get pens that you see that have just been abused by well-meaning yet not so well-informed individuals, and sometimes that's the case. You get the brown paper bag pen.
Well, to be honest, up until a few years ago, micromesh was not easily found on the pen show circuit. As far as I can remember, the only one that actually ever sold it was Paul Contorato. And he
only goes to 2 shows.
He goes to Chicago and Columbus, yeah, and I bought a couple from him, and I'm like, oh, this is because I actually just bought it for not for nibs, but for polishing pens. I thought, well, this stuff is great.
Yeah.
I bought enough from him to last me a lifetime, which is about 2 sets.
Right.
And then he started carrying the pads, and I got some of those. I said, well, the heck with this, we just buy some, and that's. But up until recently, maybe 5 years ago, you couldn't find it. It was, so.
Right.
There were other things out there, but it wasn't micromesh. Wasn't readily available. But.
Right. The stuff that I use is just because I'm from the Binder school of things. I use the buff sticks that he uses, which has 12,000 grit micromesh on one side, and then has a pink and a white section on the other side.
Right.
And,
I think I got one here, actually, believe it or not.
We have the same ones.
This one.
Okay, yeah, and so they're helpful. I really don't do any smoothing on the sandpaper sides. I use that for if I'm making a stub or a pillow italic, I use those. But that micromesh is real. That's really what it's for, is for polishing, and it puts really nice, consistent micro grooves in the nib that a brown paper bag can't do. And here's another myth that's sort of related to this. Some people will say, well, your pen can't be too smooth. It can be too smooth.
Well, sometimes you need a little feedback.
Yeah, well, one of the weirdest experiences I've ever had, I had a client from somewhere down south, I don't remember, send me a Pelican 400 or 600 with 2 nibs. And, of course, Pelican 600 nibs are gold. And so I was tuning them, and I was doing everything that I was supposed to do, using my Mylar paper to finish them and all that kind of stuff. And then I would try to write with them. And they felt horrible. And so I basically went back and retuned them. And I did this with both of the nibs until I didn't wear the tipping off, but it wasn't. If those pens were mine, I would be upset if I got them back. So I just replaced both of the nibs, which is not cheap.
Yeah.
But some of the best lessons you learn as a pen guy are lessons that you have to pay for out of your own pocket. So, and so I asked Richard about it. He's like, did you go back to the buff stick afterwards? And I said, no. He said, well, there you go. And I'm like, so what's the problem? He said, you're making the pens too smooth. And I said, well, okay, explain that. He says, well, when you use micromesh, it wears micro grooves in the writing in the tipping material of the pen, so that when you write, what happens is the ink flows out from the slit, fills the grooves, and basically the pen writes on the pad of ink that's between the nib and the paper. Says if you don't have grooves, that ink's not going to go there, and your pen is going to write like it's not tuned and hasn't been tuned ever. That's exactly what was going on. So
yeah, I've actually had. I remember years ago I had a vanishing point that wrote that way.
Yeah,
it was so smooth. It was ridiculous. On certain papers, it worked great on crappy office paper.
Right.
But on good paper, I couldn't write with it at all.
Right. It's probably one of the most shocking things in Penland is that I've ever learned, because it's counterintuitive. But then when you have somebody who knows what they're doing, like Richard, tell you the physics behind it, it makes sense. So
no brown paper bags.
No brown paper bags.
Now here's a question that's right up my alley.
Okay.
Fine nibs can feel as smooth as broad nibs.
No.
No
Yes.
way.
Not usually.
No way.
Okay, so I have some fine nibs that are incredibly smooth.
Right.
So is it that they're smooth for a fine nib, or I'm just delusional, or?
Yeah, there we go.
No, I don't think you're delusional. Fine nibs can be made to write very smoothly, and should be made to write very smoothly by somebody who's tuning nibs. The challenge is it really is a question of physics. A broad nib has more surface area that the ink lubricates. And a fine nib has less tipping material, so there's less physical stuff to have the ink lubricate. So it's not as lubricated when you're writing with it on the paper. Now, a fine nib should not dig. It shouldn't scratch. It shouldn't be getting paper in between the tines. It can still be made to write very smoothly. But there's a wholesale difference just because of the physics of everything between the way that a fine point, smooth fine point will write and a smooth broad point will write.
Your mine's perfect, and the broad point is a paintbrush.
That's the same way I feel. Most of my pens that are my own private pens are fine points or finer. So,
well, it also depends on the country of origin too, I think. So
yes,
there are a number of variables, but what about
part of that question about how good a fine point writes as opposed to a broad is some people want essentially their pen to write so smooth that I would suggest that they go back and get a medium nib instead of the fine, because if you open up a nib to the point where it's lubricating the tipping material like a broad nib does, you no longer have a fine point pen. Yep. A fine point line is about 0.6 millimeters, but you can open up a fine point nib to gush, and the end result will be like 0.8 on the paper. And so if you want that, that's fine. It's your pen, but go get a medium nib. Because if I open up the slit on a nib too much, you might interrupt the capillary action that pulls the ink to the tip of the nib, or you might get it so wide that it's not tunable so that it won't dig into the sides of the paper. Because then essentially you're writing with a catamaran instead of a flat bottom boat.
Right.
So yeah, there's a number of factors.
How about myth number 5, 18-karat nibs are flexible?
No.
The more gold, the better.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Sailor 21 karat, they flex when you look at them.
They do, and then you send them to me.
Then you cry, then you send them.
Yes. There are a lot of nibs that are marketed, well, okay, they're not marketed, they're thought of as flexible. Anything above 14 karat in the gold world is thought by many people to be flexible, and it's not. It will indeed flex, but usually only about once. Yep. And then
that's what I tell people. It'll flex once.
Yeah, and then it needs professional help.
Alignment.
And some other.
Why do you think people think that? Is it just because it's a higher gold?
I think so. I think that's part of it. I think it's just a general, and I'm going to try to say this in a nice way, it's just a general ignorance.
Okay.
I think that there's an idea that, oh, well, I think this is the way it is. And so, therefore, I'm going to push my pen to do what I want it to do. Frankly, some people get away with it. I don't know how. But there's also another factor for those who don't know. The geometry of a flexible nib is different than a regular nib.
Yep.
And so the shoulders are much lower in a flex nib, especially if you start looking at vintage flex nibs. I actually have a Chilton pen right here that I bought for an obscenely low price, and you can see that the geometry on that nib is not normal because it's at least a semi-flexible nib.
Yes, tines are really long.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So the shoulders are low and the tines look really long. And usually, the flex nibs that are worth their weight in gold, pardon the phrase, are the 14 karat gold.
Yeah.
So
it's what the gold is alloyed with. I think that makes the difference.
That's right.
And so Go ahead.
Oh, but some pen makers can't sell 14 karat gold nibs because it doesn't go up to their country's
Right.
threshold of what actual gold is.
France in particular.
Right.
Yeah, France
requires 18 karat to be even considered gold. So
right.
That's why you see on most of the, the big names,
right.
All the gold nibs are 18 karat.
Right. So. But yeah, and titanium nibs people think are flexible, but titanium has no memory. Gold and stainless steel have a memory, and it's springy, but it'll stay sprung. So if people want the titanium nib pens, and some of them are really cool, I suggest that either you have a really light hand or work on getting a really light hand for that. So, but there are some of those titanium nib pens that I think are really cool, and I would not mind to have them. I just can't afford them. So
we can help you out.
Oh, there you
go. Let's see.
This is one of my favorites, number 6. You want to go ahead? This is our last myth.
All you need to fix nibs, and I'm just going to do this because I can.
I know what you're going to do.
This one's
heavy. They're heavy.
They are
very heavy.
All you need to fix nibs are a nib block.
Yep.
Is a nib block.
Not true.
Yeah. You saying that about Brian or in general, Tim?
No, in general. Most of the nib work that I do to fix bent nibs is done with a pair of pliers. In fact, these are them. They're 5 1/4, I think, inch round nose Grobet pliers. And
so if you have those, you can fix nibs.
No. No. Not necessarily.
Wait a minute, I got those too. Wait a minute.
The there's really not one simple thing. A lot of the things you basically as a repair guy, but especially as a nib guy, you develop a bag of tricks, and your bag of tricks comes out whenever you face a certain situation, and sometimes your initial trick doesn't work, or doesn't work well enough, and so you go to another bag of tricks and you do things like that. I mean, I've seen people put a nib in a nib block with a burnisher and a hammer and bang dents out of it, and it works. I have not chosen to do that yet.
That's an awfully aggressive technique.
It is. I have not chosen to do that yet as a matter of professional work on somebody else's pen, mostly because I've done it on one of my nibs that I was trying to fix, and I had a really bad result.
You pounded your pen?
No, I took the nib out, and I flattened part of it to the point where it was just hopelessly distorted. So
you need more than the tool. You need the tools, but you need more than just the tools. There's nothing. There's no shortcut for experience and learning.
There's no shortcut, and there's no utopia tool for nibs.
Well, or for pen repair either. Just because you've got a handful of sacks and a bottle of shellac doesn't mean you can repair the pens.
I don't know of all of the snorkel restorations that I've done, because that's like my current obsession right now is the snorkel. Of all of the snorkel restorations I've done, I think I can tell you that no two have been identical. There's always something like, oh, that's different. Or,
yep.
You know.
In a good way or a bad way?
Sometimes both. Yeah. Like, no, you don't shellac the sack to the sack guard. No, no, no. So.
Let's see. So that was it for the myths. I think that was pretty good. A couple more things we were gonna hit maybe here on the
go ahead.
On the topic. Most challenging nibs to work on.
The most challenging nibs that I find to work on, there's a couple of them. One is the nib that belongs to somebody who doesn't know what they want.
So somebody just sits down in front of you and says, I just bought this, I want it tweaked, and they don't want a specific cut or grind, they just want it better.
Right. Or the person that wants a cursive italic but tells me they want a stub. Because
so
if you tell me that you want a crisp italic and then you don't like it, I can fix that. But the cuts on a stub and a cursive italic are different. And so once you start making the cuts and they're different enough, you can make a cursive italic more stub-like, but it's never going to be a true stub. So those kind of things, and also people who don't. This kind of goes back to one of the myths. People who think that I'm going to make them write beautifully with a perfectly tuned nib.
You can't do that?
No, I wish.
Man, I was going to get in line first thing in D.C.
There you go. Yeah. But there are some people that think, well, if this, that, and the other thing, and also I find this with people who want italic nibs a lot, regardless of where it is on the italic nib scale. Some people will get those nibs, and they will write with them, and they won't like them because they won't be able to write well with it because they're rotators, and you can't rotate an italic nib,
right?
Because you get on the corner of it, and it gets you out of anything close to the writing pad, and you're just kind of toast at that point.
Yep,
so,
that's me.
There are more forgiving italics, but it's not. Again, there's no utopian nib.
I'll get there.
Well, in the words of one of my trumpet teachers, now he was saying this about trumpets, but I'll say it about pens. It's kind of like a marriage. Both of you have to make adjustments.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
What about nibs that you get that are sent in or that come to you at a show that have been worked on by other people badly? And I'm not talking Richard or Mike Masuyama or Mata Shah. I'm talking, I have a friend who has a pen who had some...
They got a nib block and a paper bag.
Right. Some of those can be the most frustrating, and the reason that they're frustrating is it eliminates a number of options that I can use to fix it. If somebody has tuned a pen poorly, and they've just given up because they weren't getting the results they wanted, and I look at it, and they've worn a 45-degree foot at the tip of the nib, there are ways to overcome that, depending on how much tipping material is left and so on and so forth. But with some of those, you can only make it better. You can't fix it.
And how do you set up a client's expectations for that?
I try to be very gentle and very direct. I'll tell them I can make it better, but I can't make it like it was before. Another thing.
Someone else messed it up.
Yeah. Well, I had a pen that a guy sent to me. He emailed me. This happened about a year ago. It was a Mont Blanc. He bought it at a yard sale for like $20, but it's like a spectacular gold and silver, like 144.
Oh man,
just beautiful. And I think he dropped it. But he asked what my turnaround time was. It was too long for him, so he sent it to someone else. And he emailed me after and said it's worse now than it was before I sent it. And he said, "Can I send it to you?" And so I got the pen. And he's actually fairly local to this area, so I was able to deliver it to him in person. But there was a wiggle that was put in the right time that I couldn't make it factory, which frustrated me. It was beautiful again, it wrote again, it looked like a nib again, but I couldn't make it factory. And there are some things that happens from time to time. I remember one of the, and this will probably lead into the next talking point. I remember somebody sent me I don't think it was a Schaefer Triumph nib, but it was like the Legacy, which has the,
Okay.
I'll call it a scoop. It's kind of like the fake Triumph point. It goes up at the end, but it's not like the Triumph nib that goes up at the very end. So there's some people that don't understand that upturn at the end of the nib is intentional. Like Schaefer built it that way. And so this pen had obviously been dropped, and by the time it was sent to me for a retuning, it was straight.
And do you look at those things and just kind of shake your head and go, ugh, or do you?
Yeah, that's kind of my reaction. I'm sure that when I first started straightening nibs, that somebody somewhere is going to get one of the nibs that I straightened, looked at it, and shake their head. I just, because nobody's perfect, and there's varying degrees of restoration that people are able to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no problem saying that there are people who are better at this than I am. I have no problem acknowledging that there are people who are worse at this than I am. All of us, all nib workers and all pen people in one way or another stand on the shoulders of giants who came before them. And it's important to avail yourself of the writings and the teachings of the giants if you want to do it well. And so one of the things that is particularly problematic in nib working, whether you're tuning a nib, whether you're unspringing a nib, whether you're straightening a nib, is depending on the manufacturer, not every nib profile is the same. Sailor nibs are a lot flatter on top than any other nib. I have never been successful trying to get a replacement Sailor nib for any pen, for any client.
Sailor doesn't sell nibs separately.
That's right. So I found out
one. It comes with the rest of the pen.
Let me demonstrate that Sailor flat.
Oh.
Yeah, it's totally flat. It's kind of cool.
It's kind of like
I'll
mine
show
here.
that.
Look at that. We're kind of like.
Oh, look at that.
Kind of like pen
Is yours
pals.
blue?
No, mine.
We are pen pals.
But a Yovo number 5 will fit in a Sailor pen. You have to do some. Yeah, you have to do some major Dremel work, and the Sailor nibs have a notch. It is, but if it's between having a gorgeous pen that doesn't work and making that gorgeous pen work, you have to cut like the back fifth of the nib off, and you have to put a notch in it so it'll hold on the feed, and then you have to get it on the nib block outside of the conical place, so you just have to use the flat side, and you just have to flatten the stupid thing out. Otherwise, it won't work at all. But it's a very it's doable, but that's trying to make the profile. I'll use an English term. You have to get the warp and woof of the nib right in order for it to work on a proper pen.
Okay. Warp and woof.
So I think that's one of the big challenges to anybody wanting to get into nib work is to learn your profiles. Vacuumatic nibs are, looking at the side, are essentially straight. Mont Blanc nibs are humped, very subtly, but they're humped because they match up with the feeds. And so not all the feeds are made the same way. And so if you look at a bunch of different nibs from the side, you'll see that their profiles are different, and their profiles are that way because it's integral to the functioning of the pen with the feed. And so if you're putting something back together that somebody tried to screw up and break apart, that's part of what has to come into it. So it's not just pulling one nib out and putting another one in. So.
Yeah, now I'm going to be looking at all my nibs from the side. It's cool.
Let's ask one more question here.
Yeah.
And this was the latecomer to the list today.
Nah, good.
I thought this might be interesting. Best nibs on the market today.
Best nibs on the market today, I think, are the Yovo nibs. I will say that they're the best non-proprietary nib on the market today, which is to say, a lot of pen manufacturers use them.
Are they the best, or are they just the most consistent, or is that the same thing?
I think they're the most consistent, but there's still challenges with them. Let's put it this way: they're easier to tune than some of the other makers. So that's probably a bit of yes, they're better, and yes, they're more consistent. I can make Lavender uses Schmidt nibs, or at least the Lavender True Riders that I have that I haven't replaced with Yovo number 5s because it's a perfect match. Those ones that I have, I can make it right as good as a Yovo, but it just takes twice as long. So, but yeah, those are the best, I think, non-proprietary nib, and I think that some of the pens that are out there that use them, I mean, it's like a who's who of the modern pen world. Now, some companies do have their own proprietary nibs, and that's a little bit different. Aurora pens, which I'm a big fan of, although I don't own one, their nibs are idiosyncratic in their own way. They tend to have, at least in my experience, a little bit more feedback than most other nibs.
But they're so pretty.
Oh, they're phenomenal pens. And you know, some of the other
just saying.
There are a couple modern pen manufacturers that I wish would use Yovo nibs instead of their own proprietary nibs. None of them shall be named, but
probably a smart move.
Right, but they, which is not to say they're bad nibs. I just think that the Yovos are more consistent.
Okay, what about Japanese nibs in general?
I find them to be very good. In some cases, they are easier to tune. I think the precision on the Japanese nibs out of the box is a little, in some cases a little, in some cases a lot more consistent. It's and I think that may be just a cultural thing in the Japanese culture. They are very insistent on dotting the I's and crossing the T's in a particular way, and that may be part of that. But I do like some of the Japanese nibs, just the way they write. The Pilot nibs that I've played with, I really like. Even I think Platinum is a Japanese brand. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
It is. It's Sailor, Pilot, and Platinum are generally the big three.
Big three. Yeah.
So some of the Platinum nibs I've played with, I've been really impressed with. So yeah, it's again, I don't want to say it's a crapshoot because it's not, but it's usually, in my experience, which again, your mileage may vary, but in my experience with Japanese nibs, they're a little bit more consistent out of the box. So. I do think I will say
I tend to agree.
Yep.
I do think that the best nib, and I'm not talking about flexible nibs. The best nib that you can get on a vintage fountain pen, I think, is the Schaefer Triumph nib, and that's hard for me to say because I love the Parker 51. I think they write great, but if you want a nib that it's no frills, but it's a great nib, is the Schaefer Triumph nib. I think is the best vintage nib that was ever made by any company.
Yeah, that's a good nib. Absolutely.
I'm not gonna die on that hill, but
yeah, well, you could debate that ad nauseum.
Yeah, for
sure. So,
but they're fun to fix if somebody drops them because you got to get the upturn at the end right.
That's where you want it to have a little bit of a bend.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I still stand by our beloved Sailors and Pilots.
Oh, sure.
Platinum we're going to talk about in just a minute. But no, it's interesting to get a whole different perspective because you are a user, but you also work on them, so you have the perspective from both sides.
Right. And I think it's weird that pens, certain nibs and certain pens do tend to develop their own personality. You know, you can have 100 different pairs of shoes, but you can always, if you try on those different 100 pairs of shoes, after you've put your own pair of shoes in there, you're always going to be able to find them by the way they feel. And your pens sort of develop their own personality. You've adjusted to it, it's adjusted to you, and it feels like home sometimes. Some of
Honey,
those.
Did you hear that? Tim said I can have 100 pair of shoes.
Oh,
You're well on your way. You're going to milk this whole car thing for what it's worth for the next 5 years, aren't you?
You betcha. Yeah.
Some pens make the connection more quickly, but you know, that connection and those adjustments are they're good.
Well, sometimes the user has to learn. You know, some pens with a very rigid nib versus, you know, like I have an Esterbrook that has a very rigid nib, and I love it.
Right.
And then I have a Sailor which has a much softer nib, and I love that. But it does take a little bit to mentally make that shift.
Yes. Yes.
And I think maybe the problem with some people is they don't make that shift, and they just assume that if this pen writes like this, or I write like this with this pen, I press this hard or don't press at all. You do that with all your pens, and sometimes that's where you run into problems.
Absolutely. That's a very true statement. I have a collection of 51s. I'm collecting the Aerometrics with the gold converging lines cap. And the plum that I have and the burgundy that I have are very similar in color, and if you don't pay attention, you can mistake one for the other. And they write completely differently from each other. So, I mean, that's just sort of a... I'll be thinking I'm writing with the plum, and I'm like, oh no, I picked up Mr. Burgundy instead. So
plum is such a tough color to tell.
Yeah.
Period.
You need good light for it.
Yeah.
So, but it's
all right.
It's fun stuff because, you know, I think that's one of the reasons why people have multiple pens, because they want to use them for different things and for different reasons.
Yeah, it's like a different outfit.
Yeah.
You feel differently when you use it, or you act differently.
Yeah.
Some are fun, some are fancy, some are utilitarian.
Right.
I have some pens that I use to write the list out, and then I have other pens that I use just to cross those list items out. But it sounds ridiculous, because who would have one pen just to do that? But
it doesn't sound ridiculous to a pen person. People who may not people who may not understand, you know, people who were like, I can get a box of Bics for $5. Why would I want to spend, you know, all the money for a Mont Blanc?
More for us.
Well, yeah, but people may not understand that, and that's fine. They can, you know.
I bet they have a hobby too.
I'm sure they do, and they probably enjoy it very much,
something.
and it would baffle us completely.
Yep.
Exactly.
So.
All right.
I have in my hands two letters here.
Do you? I have in my hands two paper blanks planners. I think we're finally at that point. We are. I have to say, we have had a lot of fun with far more entries than we thought we'd get. We had some really fun ones. We had some really serious ones. We had people who wanted to win the planner to give to a spouse or loved one in order to get that person organized. A couple different people wanted them to try to get organized, or maybe this would make it worthwhile. We had a lot of really fun reasons for why somebody wanted to win a planner.
So I read them all today. I got into the store and I read them all today again. And we picked what we thought were the two best entries. And I will just name them here, and if they're not watching, they will just mysteriously receive a paper blanks planner in the mail just in time to.
Yeah, cool. I think I want one.
Where's my drum roll here? Here we go. And the two winners are, and I don't think either one of them is in the chat, but it's hard to tell. Melody M. and Paula Y. So. you two will be getting your planners in the mail within the next week or so. We'll probably ship them out tomorrow. So congratulations.
Yeah, these are cool.
So, should we hit up real quick what's going on in the store?
Yep, real quick, and then we'll move on. Let's see, new in store. Today we were restocked, finally. Mont Blanc ink arrived. We got in the JFK and Lavender Purple and a number of other ones, but I know the JFK we've been out of for a while,
yeah.
and a lot of people have been emailing and asking, so it's back in. But they shorted us, so, so if you're looking for it, get it soon.
Unfortunately, that's just kind of how it goes. So it is what it is. And the big news this week is I'm pointing at you.
Oh.
Yes. Number B on the list.
Well, number B on the list is the pilot vanishing points.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at C. That's right.
Yeah. So a couple weeks ago, we showed the new bamboo vanishing points. These are so cool. Brian got a big ticket item a couple weeks ago, and I get pens. So I think one has to go home with me.
You're totally going to milk this for the
I'm going to milk this. I'm going to milk this for a long time.
The next 60 car payments.
Yes. Brian got a new car, and so Lisa gets whatever she wants. Doesn't sound right, but anyway.
No.
I heard from Pilot yesterday, and we actually had to wait until the general manager told his staff that stub nib units are coming for vanishing points in July.
That's exciting. That's going to be neat. I'd be curious to see how they put that together.
Well, they are going to have open stock, which means you can buy just the nib unit with the converter, with the black ion coating, and the rhodium-plated 18-karat gold. Okay. So you can buy the nib unit separately. And
did they say what size the stub is going to be?
I didn't ask.
I
was
this big or
huge? No, I don't know. And then the stub nibs will also be offered on the black matte vanishing point and the black and rhodium vanishing point and the black carbonesque vanishing point.
Oh, they're only being offered on certain pens.
Correct.
Oh, well, that makes me feel better. I don't have to buy every single vanishing point option. No, that's cool. That's really cool. I think I'd like to try one of those out. That'd be nice to have one. I put in my rod, and that would be neat.
Okay.
So. Well,
we can make that happen. I also found out that due to some manufacturing costs, the matte black vanishing point will go up in price. Not until 2016, so you've still got 6 months. And then rollerball and ballpoint refills, the price will be going up, but you've still got time. If you want the black matte vanishing point, grab it.
What is this here? See so I got the car right, and I'm supposed to be on pen hiatus for a while, and then what did this show up like the next day, or what was the? It
was brutally unfair to you.
It was brutally unfair because I said, okay, I'm perfectly happy getting the car. I don't necessarily need to have any more pens for a while. And then this shows up in the building. Now, I'm just going to put that right there. And then I'm going to explain. There's a little story behind this. This right here is the Sailor Pro Gear Regency Stripe. This pen is so cool. It has this metal overlay, essentially, very reminiscent of the English style kind of a pattern.
It's the barleycorn from the Shalana.
Yeah, it's just gorgeous. 21 karat nib. And so the deal was when I saw this in the catalog, I said I got to have one of these. These are awesome. And we had dinner with Jin Takamura and Larry Keok in February at the LA Pen Show, and they said the Regency Stripe is no longer available. It's too heavy of a pen, so it never sold well in Japan. I mean, this thing is compared to the rest of the Sailor pens, this thing is quite heavy. There's quite some heft to it. So if you like a heavy pen, this is it, but not too heavy. And it didn't sell well, and it was discontinued. They had none in stock. That was in February, and
I ordered one.
About 2 months later, they sent us the 2015 catalog, and it's still in the catalog. So Lisa just, well, what nib? If you could get it, what nib do you want? I said, well, I want a broad. It shows up. It shows up.
I am that good.
Store. Yeah, I mean, and she's like, oh no, you got the car, you can't have the pen. I'm like, yeah.
Your birthday's coming up. It's fine. Tim, but that's fair, right? You get a car, you don't get any pens for a while.
Yeah, I would say that's not bad.
So of course, then along with that, we had an opportunity this past week, late last week, to pick up some other pens used, and I had to add this one to the collection. So I'm not really doing well on this not spending money on pens thing.
No.
A Sailor 1911 large. This is the old style burgundy. It's got the semi-flat cap here, with a 21 karat, the old style music nib. Oh. And they don't make a 1911 large in burgundy. They make a 1911 Rialo in burgundy, but they don't make the standard cartridge converter in burgundy anymore. And I said, no, that's going to go right here next to the Mont Blanc. So, yep. Yes, I'm not doing real well on this don't buy pens thing, but I think I'm done now. I think.
Yeah. Wait, we have Father's Day next weekend, and then your birthday right after that.
There we go. Yeah. This is my Father's Day present. There we go.
Yep. I did manage to squeeze in my own little Sailor. You can't tell the color. It's a dark navy blue with just a hint of translucence. It's really gorgeous in person. So that one, again, with the semi-flat top and the rounded end. Gorgeous, gorgeous pen. I don't remember what nib I have on it.
Medium, I think you got.
I have a medium, apparently.
No, we swapped them around. The medium was actually in the Sailor, and the music was in that one, so we had to swap them around. So.
We swapped nibs. That was great. So those are cool. And if you're looking, if you're interested in the Regency stripe, we can certainly get another one, or we can ask about getting another one. It's a beautiful pen. That overlay is a little pebbled barleycorn pattern. It's pretty.
Yeah, it's outstanding. It's really just outstanding.
Yeah. So. And as much as we love Sailor, we don't gush over some of them as much, and this one's gush-worthy. Let's see what else. Noodler's ink partly restocked. Noodler, I'm not sure what's going on with Noodlers. I speak to Nathan fairly often, and I know he's just incredibly busy and overworked. It's just really hard to get stocked up on ink and pens. So we did get some ink in, and that was awesome to have some of our holes on the shelf filled in. Not all of them, but we just keep ordering. And a ton of Clairefontaine and Rhodia came in, so we got restocked on that. And I'm personally loving the new larger size Rhodia dot pads. So,
cool.
Just my little thing. Bunches of new stuff on clearance at the store. You just keep finding things in boxes and in drawers and.
I don't know where some of the stuff comes from. I don't know, but
I'm not sure. We were in the storage area and found stuff like, oh, what's this? Oh my gosh, I forgot we bought this. And
yeah, like a box of leather stuff. Like where do we get?
Tim,
this
do you ever do that? Unearth things that you bought at a show or somewhere and.
Oh sure, yeah.
Would you like to put it on the clearance table?
Well,
we might be able to give you a couple inches there.
I have a bag here that I bought from an auction, I think in Philadelphia, that I still don't know where those pens are. I'll unearth them probably if we wind up moving because of the job situation. I'll probably find them 20 years from now, and they'll be even more vintage and
Yeah, someday I'll take a picture of my my laundry basket back here.
It's scary. It's scary.
I still have all those pens that I accumulated before I actually started collecting. And
have you restored them all, or are there some that just in
Some
your
of them.
early ignorance, that like, do you have any wherevers or
Oh, sure.
Arnolds or
Yeah.
Strathmores that just aren't worth restoring?
Yeah, there's a couple. I keep them as a reminder of the days where when I went into an antique store or any place that would sell vintage pens, I just pretty much bought anything that had a nib on it, which is not the most helpful way to be, but we all go through that accumulation stage when we
Yeah,
start out.
the $10 and under, it's okay to buy it without
Yeah,
question game. Yeah.
yeah. And so, pretty soon if you buy 6 of those, that gets to be pretty expensive for not a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
So,
I'll find those some year.
do we have any shout outs we got for this week?
We do.
Okay.
2 quick ones. Is Charles in the chat? I thought he was earlier. Charles and his lovely bride Angela just celebrated 44 years of, and I spoke to Charles, I think it was today, and he had some wise words regarding marriage and relationships, and so congrats and happy anniversary and good job to both of them.
Awesome.
And a quick shout out to a personal one to my mom and my sister, who drove from, I think Terry lived in, I can never remember this. It's either Austin or Houston. I think it's Houston. My sister and her husband lived in Houston, and my brother-in-law was transferred up to upstate New York to Clifton Park, and so Derek's been up there for a while, and my sister has, they have 3 cats and a dog. So my mom flew down and drove back with Terry in a minivan with 3 cats and a dog. And they all survived. I spoke to them. They were about an hour out, I guess at like 4 o'clock or something. They were an hour from home, and they were both in good moods. All 4 pets had survived. They didn't have too many major issues. Everything went really well. So big shout out to Mom and Terry for their Thelma and Louise road trip there.
Sweet. Sweet.
Yeah.
I think that's probably
Tim?
it for this week, huh?
Shout outs for you?
All the people who helped me to be able to do what I do. I stand on the shoulders of many giants. So I'm not really smart enough to have come up with this on my own. I saw my efforts before I was properly taught, and I never would have gotten here had it not been for the great generosity of guys like Richard Binder, Tom Mullane, Pendleton Brown, and Ron Zorn, and just the real awesome people in the pen world are awesome for more than one reason.
So true. Very, very true. Tim, why don't you tell everybody how they can get a hold of you?
You can go to my website, timgirdlerpens.com. There's an email link on it, but it is tim@timgirdlerpens.com. Again, remember that our situation is quite a bit fluid now, so it is taking me a long time to get to emails or to voicemails. But send them, and I will get to them, and we'll stay in touch as much as we can.
Or, of course, they can see you at the next
next pen show. We're tentative for Miami, tentative for DC, tentative for Columbus. All of that really changes, though, if a teaching job comes through. It's one of those bitter trade-offs. You're not homeless, but you don't get to go do pen shows as often. So.
Well, that is tough.
Yeah. So.
If it was just you, it might be easier, but with
Sure.
wife and kids, I guess you got to do that responsible thing.
This would be complete. I mean, I could live out of my car if it was just me, but that I have 2 daughters, one of whom will be 8, the other who will be 5 on Monday, and a wife. That changes the playing field quite a bit. I'm happy to say it's not a burden.
There you go. Awesome.
All right, is that it? That's it for this week, I think.
So yeah,
Tim, thank you very much for joining us.
I certainly appreciate you guys having us, having me, us.
It was great to learn about Nibs, and we all use them every day, but to hear a little bit about some of the efforts behind the scenes.
Yeah. It's fun stuff. I encourage anybody who wants to get into tinkering to get into it. Tinker well and do your homework before you get into it. But
get a nib block and those pliers, and you're ready to go, and a brown paper bag.
Utopia, right there.
All right. That's it for this week, everybody. Thanks for joining us this special session. And Tim, we hope you can be back sometime.
I would love it. You guys have been great, and I appreciate your hospitality very much.
Well, thank you. Cool. Going forward, then, I guess, use your pens. Write to us at Anderson Pens, 10 East College Avenue, Suite 112A, Appleton, Wisconsin, 54911.
Check us out on Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, and all other social media as Anderson Pens.
The blog, of course, blog.andersonpens.com.
And the website is andersonpens.com.
Check out the social media for updates and new products or events in the store. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. We will see you next week. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.